Hey folks, this is Curtis Brown, your instructor for HSEP 302. In your course syllabus, and as I mentioned in the course announcement, we're going to have a brief interview by a practitioner in emergency management. I'm going to ask a few questions about their experience and background related to emergency management and emergency preparedness planning. I'm happy to be joined with Donna Pletch, one of my colleagues here at the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, who has a ton of experience in emergency management and emergency planning in particular. So I want to welcome her. I'll keep the camera pointing on her while I ask her a couple of questions. Please note this interview, you will see it on your quiz and possibly the test at the midterm or the end of the semester. So all of the stuff that we'll discuss here today complements your reading and other aspects of the course. So Donna, welcome to my TV show.
Thank you, Curtis.
Donna, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your current position, and your previous position here at VDEM.
So for the past 9 years, I've been the Strategic Planning Branch Chief, and in that role, I was responsible for managing the State Emergency Operations Plan, as well as continuity planning for all state agencies. I've now transitioned recently in the past month to a new role as VDEM's Chief Regional Coordinator for Region 1, which is in the central part of the state.
Great. That's a lot of great experience, both with emergency operation planning as well as continuity operation plan, what we call COOP. Over the last 3 to 4 weeks, the class has been focusing their attention on both natural and man-made hazards and threats. And now we're focusing on emergency preparedness planning. Tell us how important it is for emergency managers to understand threats and hazards, and how does that relate to planning?
Well, it's really important that you understand your threats and hazards, because you can't plan for something if you don't think it can happen in your jurisdiction. So it's really important that you know your threats and hazards and understand that threats and hazards can evolve over time. I think what we've seen over years, over the past several years overseas, when it comes to man-made, human-caused hazards, some of the dynamics are changing, or their methodology is changing. We've seen, people driving trucks into large crowds, things that we haven't really seen in this country to a great degree. But threats and hazards do evolve over time. So it's important to stay on top of those and understand what the risks are to your jurisdiction.
So these emergency plans are living documents that have to adjust and be updated as necessary.
Absolutely, yes. And as you use them either in exercises or in real world events, then there's always lessons learned, and you can usually go back and update your plans to reflect those lessons.
That's a great point. After action reviews are a core component of emergency management, yes. And after that, plans might change. Do you have experience with that here in Virginia?
Yes, we definitely have updated plans based on after action reviews. And in some cases it's minor changes, and in other cases it's significant changes that maybe we didn't address the hazard as well as we should have, and didn't understand all of the cascading impacts that a hazard can have, and didn't plan well for all of those cascading impacts. So it's important to plan for the initial impacts of a hazard, but also to understand what those cascading impacts are, and include that in all of your planning.
Great. You mentioned your experience with working on developing and maintaining the Virginia Emergency Operation Plan, just broadly in terms of local, state emergency operation plan, even the private sector. How important are EOPs, emergency operation plans, to organizations?
They're very important in the sense that they document the responsibilities and capabilities of all of the response organizations, whether that be state agencies, private, sector partners, nonprofit organizations, all of the stakeholders that come to the table in a response and recovery effort. So it's very important to document all that. It actually holds those entities responsible for the things that they're tasked to do in the plan. I think the most important part of it, though, is the planning process, and getting together and understanding what each other's capabilities are, and what capabilities and response elements that they can bring to the table, and kind of walking through that in the planning process. That's the most important.
That's a real important point. One of the things I've emphasized to the class is that emergency management serves in a coordinating role, yes. That the field is not responsible for everything because they don't have the assets.
Right.
Law enforcement has unique, specific assets, fire, health, etc. Can you touch on that a little bit in terms of or elaborate on that, the capabilities that other people bring to the table, but also the coordinating role of emergency management?
Yeah, well, that is our primary role, as you know, at the state level, is we coordinate all of those resources. And lots of state agencies have different capabilities that you may not think of. For example, some of our state parks, that falls under Department of Conservation and Recreation, they have people who are trained in search and rescue. So we have resources in various parts of the state and in different state agencies that you may not be aware of. When you're in this coordinating role, you have to know what all those resources are and where they are in case you needed to coordinate and deploy them together to support, like, for example, a large search and rescue effort. So, yeah.
Great. Well, that actually touches on this fourth question I had on you for you about the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operation Plan. Can you explain the organization of the plan? I know there's different ways the EOPs can be written. How is the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operation Plan organized? I know it's received awards and been certified as a best practice, but the class will be looking at the COVOP this week, so just want to give some insight on how it's organized and set up.
Excuse me, sure. So right now, there's really 4 sections to the state EOP. There's a base plan, and that basic plan outlines basically the core concepts and the organizational structure of how the state's going to respond. It also goes through the authorities of, for example, the governor, state agencies, as well as local governments, and then our private and nonprofit partners, and what their authorities are and when it comes to disaster response and recovery. Next would be 17 emergency support functions. The federal government has 15 emergency support functions, or ESFs we call it. We have 2 additional ones. They are volunteer and donations management and military affairs. We felt like those warranted enough importance to have an emergency support function of their own. So after that, there are 5 support annexes. Those are things like continuity of government, finance and administration, just things that are large enough to warrant having their own support annex. And then some hazard-specific annexes, of course, hurricane and tropical storm response, radiological, others like that have lots of elements that didn't necessarily just fit into an emergency support function, so they have their own annex to coordinate all the elements that would need to respond to those larger incidents.
Great. And those are some key terms and words that the students will see in their quiz and on the exam, understanding the different components of the emergency operation plan for the state. Final question, FEMA serves as a guiding agency. A lot of this information came out post 9/11 and post Hurricane Katrina. Describe the significance of CPG 101 as a planning tool for emergency management.
It is the primary source and the primary planning guidance that's out there for emergency managers. So it's kind of the Bible we all go back to when we need to justify to somebody why we do what we do in a plan. It doesn't prescript and say everything that you have to do and definitively you have to do it this certain way. It offers options for smaller to larger jurisdictions. For example, smaller jurisdictions may not be able to have 15 ESFs. They may have a department-based plan. So it does allow for some flexibility for that. It certainly stresses the importance that plans need to be all hazards and flexible and scalable. So it offers lots of options. There's a couple of things that it points out that I think are really important. It talks about plans being the what and SOPs being the how. So procedures should never really be in a plan. Those belong in other supporting documents to the plan. It also talks about not making plans so lengthy that no one will ever read them. Mm-hmm. And those of us that are planners sometimes have a hard time with that because, we feel like a lot of information that is important, it needs to get in there. Mm-hmm. But it does need to be short and concise enough that people will read it. So it is by far the go-to document for planning.
That's perfect. That's great. And a lot of good insight on why it's significant and for the field as a guide for us developing our plans. Just final, in terms of the class, we have a lot of students who are interested in public service, whether on the federal, state, or local level. some fields connected to emergency management, law enforcement, or public safety. What are some of your guidance for them pursuing a field in emergency management or one of the connected fields? What can they do now to prepare for a career?
You know, I think the best thing they can do is if they know they want to go into emergency management, that's one thing. Then there's lots of online classes they can take through FEMA that they can gain more knowledge and experience in understanding a lot of the different elements involved in emergency management. If they aren't sure if they want to go into emergency management, I would say to try to intern somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of our localities use interns. The state uses interns. At the state level, we try to expose interns to as much as we can so that they get a real breadth of knowledge of everything that we do. So I would say take every opportunity you can to network and connect with people in emergency management. And then if you can get an internship, certainly try that. If you know you want to go this route, you know, taking all the classes you can. And studying, of course, in your class really
That's right.
hard.
That's right. Reading the material and studying.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Donna, for your service and for doing this interview. That will conclude the interview. And again, as I mentioned to the class, this information will be found on the upcoming quiz at Midterm. Thanks so much, and have a good rest of the week.